From the title, you already know what I'll be talking about in this video, but I will not be able to go into many details about the Great Reset for two reasons. First, because we don't really have details about the Great Reset, just vague objectives that are already too scary to ignore. And second, because I want to focus on a sort of connect the dots exercise to show that the events of the past year and 3 months were not coincidences. So let's go back to October 2019, when Event 201 took place. The purpose of Event 201 was to simulate a global pandemic with the coronavirus, which I'm sure you do not miss the fact that that's exactly what happened during 2020. But let's continue. There were many discussions about how governments could fight a global pandemic of that sort, and one of those discussions was related to the control of information, to make sure that the so-called misinformation was stopped and health officials had only the correct information to deal with the situation. One of the guests in that panel was George Gao. He was, and probably still is, the Director General of the Chinese Center for Disease Control, and he was arguing that the existing cases and deaths in China were the result of misinformation, and that's why information needed to be controlled, according to him. Let's listen.
George, and then Avril.
Sorry, you go ahead.
No.
By now, we have more cases in China and also death cases reported, and also my staff told me that before there's misinformation and there's some belief. People believe, this is a man-made, some pharmaceutical company made the virus. So there are some violations and even, death is because of this misinformation. As a, from like the CDC, and I don't know if Steve agree with me, when you are doing the field work and you like to do some so-called TOT, training of trainers. So we really need to train the health workers, especially health care workers, their access to the patients, to the public. So make sure they got the right information. So not necessarily, sometimes the health care workers, they know something, but if they are not well trained, they might give the wrong information, but also they might say something, oh, I don't know. Even I don't know, that could hurt. So when I remember that's such a situation reminded me. When I was in Sierra Leone, I was interviewed by radio, the national radio. I was asked by one of the audience to say, okay, we believe Ebola was man-made. It's transported from, somewhere. So I think this is very important. We do the TOT. So make sure the healthcare workers have the right information.
Okay, thank you.
However, in 2020, we already know that what George Gao said in Event 201 was a lie. This misinformation, in air quotes, that he speaks of was actually the truth, that a virus was spreading in China and it was being transmitted from person to person. The Chinese Communist Party hunted down Chinese doctors that wanted to tell the public and the world what was actually happening in China, but were prevented from doing so and labeled as people that were spreading lies and misinformation, and at least one of them, that we know of, actually died of coronavirus. We had people in Event 201 stating that it was up to the WHO, the World Health Organization, to be the responsible for giving the proper information about the pandemic. Which is also curious, since in 2020 we know that China used their influence in the WHO to spread the propaganda of the Chinese Communist Party, that everything was fine and that the virus didn't even spread from person to person. The WHO went as far as saying that countries didn't need to close down their borders to fight the virus. At the same time, they were praising China for locking everything down internally. China, however, did not prevent thousands and thousands of infected people from leaving China to infect the whole world. So, in Event 201, we have people like Gao literally spreading misinformation and lies, while talking about how to control misinformation and lies. Quite ironic. We have people giving the WHO the important task of sharing proper information about the virus and pandemic, while the WHO in 2020 basically only spread lies in the first few months. So who was behind Event 201? Two of the most important creators and promoters of this event were the Gates Foundation and the World Economic Forum. Bill Gates is one of the richest men in the world and lobbies heavily for his projects. And the World Economic Forum, of course, is the one pushing for the Great Reset. And speaking of which, Let's have a look at one of the first videos the World Economic Forum released about the Great Reset a few years ago. As you can see, the Great Reset is basically communism, where the elites rule and you have nothing. Everyone is equally poor and miserable, and this is why no actual details of the Great Reset are known. That is done on purpose to hide what is really going to happen. I'm willing to bet that the details are very similar to what China already has with their rating system. People have a sort of credit score, and if someone criticizes the Chinese Communist Party, for example, their rating will be lowered, assuming that they are not arrested or killed, of course. And what does having your rating lowered mean? It means you won't be able to get a bus or train, that you won't be able to have a bank account, buy a house, or own a business. The Great Reset will bring something similar to this, to make sure that you rent things from these huge companies that will become even bigger. Right now you can have monopolies in individual countries, but the purpose of these elites and big companies is to become monopolies in the entire world. Big companies and elites already lobby to get what they want from politicians. With the Great Reset, these elites and big companies will have even more influence because they essentially control the means of production of the entire world. Which leads me to connect to what's been happening in 2020, where even though the WHO no longer supports lockdowns because they bring more problems than solutions, many countries are still using lockdowns as the only measure to fight the spread of the virus. And what are the consequences of the lockdowns? Besides the obvious things like people not socializing and having mental issues and all the consequences from that, like abusive substances and alcohol, we also have economic ruin. Small and medium-sized businesses are being forced to close. They essentially go bankrupt and lose their way to earn a living. At the same time, these large corporation, big companies can remain open and actually increase their value and their owners' fortunes. And this is exactly what those promoting the Great Reset want. Complete power and control over everyone else. If you need anything, you go to them, and you cannot own that thing, you can only rent it. We will essentially be the slaves of these large corporations, interest groups, and elites that are now lobbying to keep every other business closed. Those pushing for the Great Reset are also basically the same that pushed for globalism. Globalism shifted millions and millions of jobs from the West to the East, and during this pandemic we saw what that meant. Our complete dependence on Chinese production, because no one else in the world is making certain products right now, except for the Chinese. And this made sure that the country that caused the pandemic, China, is actually profiting from it. Those pushing for the Great Reset are also basically the same that pushed for no borders and mass illegal migration, of which Europe and Europeans have already paid the highest price for, since because of that, Europe is no longer a safe continent, as it was a few years ago. Not to mention the fact that the value of work is now lower than before thanks to the influx of millions of low to no-skill workers that appeared in Europe. Given that these plans have years and years in the making, and that the same people that simulated the world pandemic are the ones pushing to use it to implement those plans and force communism down everyone's throats, as far as I'm concerned, all of this was not a coincidence. It was a plan that disregarded the lives of millions of people to extend the influence of these very rich people and these very large corporations around the world. For those that know history, that's exactly what communism has always been. Elites pushing to control and enslave everyone else. It doesn't matter how many have their lives destroyed or ended. What matters for these elites and these large corporations are the end results. Those that have been saying this was happening for years have been labeled as conspiracy theorists, were censored, banned, had their lives ruined, but they were actually right. When these elites, like puppet masters, work to implement what they want and even talk about it in public, it's no longer a conspiracy theory, it is the reality they want to make happen, and we can't allow them to do it. Anyway, I hope you like this, and I'll see you next time.